My name is Eleanor Voss, and I am 78 years old, and I want to tell you about the year someone tried to convince the world that my mind was gone while it was still sharp enough to outsmart them. I was sitting in my own kitchen, in the chair I have sat in for 30 years, listening to my daughter-in-law explain to a man in a grey suit why I should not be trusted to sign my own name. She used the word concerning 4 times. She used the word decline twice. She did not once look at me while she said it, and I remember thinking that was the strangest part. You can lie to someone's face. It takes a different kind of person to lie about someone while they are sitting 3 feet away. The man in the suit was an estate attorney named Russo, and he kept glancing at me like I might do something unpredictable, the way you watch a dog that's been described to you as nervous around strangers. I wasn't nervous. I was furious, and I have found that fury, when you let it sit quietly instead of spilling out, looks a lot like calm. I'll back up. I taught high school English for 34 years in a small town on the Oregon coast, the kind of place where the fog rolls in before the school bus does. My husband Walter died 9 years ago, heart attack, no warning, a Tuesday like any other Tuesday until it wasn't. After that it was just me and the house and the garden he'd never quite finished building a fence around. I have one son, Marcus, who moved to Phoenix for work and married a woman named Priya who I liked, genuinely liked, for the better part of a decade. I have one grandson, Theo, 22, who used to spend every summer with me until college got in the way, and who calls me on Sundays even now, even when he has nothing to say, just to hear my voice on the line for 10 minutes. 2 years ago I fell on the porch steps and broke my hip. It healed fine, but the family decided, reasonably, that I shouldn't be living alone anymore, not entirely alone. Marcus and Priya couldn't relocate, his job wouldn't allow it, so they hired someone. A home health aide. Her name was Donna Farsk, and she came with excellent references from an agency 2 towns over, and for the first several months she was, by every appearance, wonderful. She remembered that I took my tea without sugar. She drove me to the pharmacy without complaint. She laughed at my jokes, or at least she laughed in the right places, which I have since learned is not the same thing. It was Theo who noticed first, the summer before last, that Donna had started answering questions that were addressed to me. He'd asked me something small, what I wanted for dinner, and Donna answered before I'd opened my mouth. She'll have the soup. She's been having trouble with her jaw. I had not been having trouble with my jaw. I said so. Donna smiled at Theo like I'd confirmed something rather than denied it, and said, "She forgets," in a voice soft enough to sound like affection and firm enough to sound like fact. I didn't think much of it at the time. People talk over the elderly constantly. It's one of the small humiliations nobody warns you about. You go from being asked your opinion to being discussed in front of you, like furniture that happens to have feelings. I let it go. I shouldn't have. Over the following months, small things began appearing in conversations I didn't remember having. Marcus would call and ask how I was feeling about everything going on, and I'd ask what he meant, and there would be a pause on the line, a particular kind of pause, before he'd say never mind, Mom, it's fine. Priya started signing her emails to me with phrases like we just want you comfortable, which is the sort of thing people say when they've already made a decision and are easing you toward agreeing with it. I started keeping a notebook. Not because I doubted myself yet, not consciously, but because I am a teacher, and teachers write things down. Dates, conversations, anything Donna said that didn't match what I remembered saying or doing. I told myself it was just a habit. It was actually the beginning of building a case, though I didn't have the word for it yet. The notebook turned out to matter more than anything else I did that year. In September, Donna began suggesting, gently, that I see a specialist. Just for peace of mind, she said, for everyone. I went, because refusing would have looked like exactly the kind of stubbornness she was already implying I had. The doctor, a younger man with kind eyes and not nearly enough time per patient, ran a cognitive screening that took 11 minutes. I scored well. He told me so. Donna, who had driven me and sat in on the appointment because I'd asked her tour, in the waiting room afterward, on the phone with Marcus, described the visit completely differently. I heard her say the words borderline and watching closely, neither of which the doctor had said to me. I wrote it in the notebook. Date, time, exact phrasing, as close as I could remember it. By November, Marcus came to visit, alone, without Priya, which was unusual enough that I knew something was being decided before he said a word. We sat in the living room and he had that look he used to get as a boy right before confessing he'd broken something. He told me the family was concerned. He used the word guardianship. He said it gently, the way you'd tell someone their dog had to be put down, like the kindness of his tone was supposed to soften what the words actually meant, which was that he was considering taking away my legal right to make decisions about my own life. I asked him where this was coming from. He said Donna had been documenting things. Confusion about dates. Forgetting conversations. Getting lost on a walk to the mailbox and back, a walk of maybe 40 yards, which I had absolutely never done. I told him that wasn't true. He said he believed me, mostly, but that he also trusted Donna, who saw me every day, more than he trusted his own judgment from 3 states away. I understood that. I even sympathized with it. It is a terrible position to be in, loving someone and not being there enough to know for certain what's real. What I didn't understand, not yet, was why Donna would invent any of this. I found out in December, by accident, the way you find out most important things. I was looking for a stamp in the kitchen drawer where Walter used to keep odds and ends, and I found a folder that wasn't mine, tucked beneath some old phone books Donna must have forgotten to remove or hadn't thought I'd ever look under. Inside were photocopies. My bank statements. A printout of my will, the one filed with my attorney, the one Donna should never have had access to. And a business card for Russo, the estate attorney, with a note in handwriting that wasn't mine, listing dates, my birthday, the date of Walter's death, the date I'd broken my hip. Dates that meant something to me. Dates a person might use to guess at passwords, or to ask questions designed to make an old woman seem like she was struggling to keep track of her own life. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I didn't confront her. I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't bravery, not at first. It was fear, the specific fear of a woman who had just realized that the person controlling her daily medication schedule, her meals, her access to her own family, might also be the person trying to take everything else. I didn't know yet how far it had gone. I didn't know who else might already believe I couldn't be trusted to defend myself. So I did the only thing that felt safe. I kept writing in the notebook, and I started being careful about what I said in front of her, and where. In January, Theo came to visit for his winter break, and I told him everything, in the garden, away from the house, in a voice low enough that the wind would carry it off before it reached anyone's window. He didn't say much while I talked. He's like his grandfather that way, quiet when something matters, loud about nothing important. When I finished, he asked if he could see the notebook. He read it twice. Then he asked me something I hadn't thought to ask myself. He asked if I'd ever recorded any of my conversations with Donna. I hadn't. But I remembered something. Years earlier, before any of this began, I bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind students used to use for lectures, because I liked to record myself reading drafts of letters aloud before sending them, to hear how they sounded. I hadn't used it in ages. It was in the drawer of my nightstand, batteries probably dead. Theo found it that night. The batteries were dead. He replaced them. And there, on the recorder, were 11 old files, voice memos I'd made to myself over the past 3 years, mostly mundane, grocery lists read aloud, a draft eulogy I'd written for a friend, myself thinking through a crossword clue. Nothing useful, at first listen. But the recorder had something else. An auto-record function I had turned on once, years ago, intending to use it during a phone call with my insurance company, and had apparently never turned off. It activated whenever the device was moved or handled, a feature meant for catching dictation on the fly. It had been sitting in that drawer, occasionally triggered, occasionally capturing fragments of whatever was happening nearby, for longer than I realized. Most of the fragments were nothing. Static, the sound of a drawer closing, my own voice muttering about where I'd put my glasses. But 3 of them were Donna. Donna, on the phone in my bedroom, where she had no real reason to be, telling someone, would later learn it was Rousseau's paralegal, that I was getting worse, that I'd stopped recognizing the kitchen, a thing I had never done in my life. Donna, in a different recording, rehearsing what sounded like a script, practicing phrases to use with Marcus, testing out how to describe a conversation that, as far as I could tell from my own memory and my notebook, had never actually taken place. And one recording, the clearest one, the one that mattered most, Donna talking to someone about a percentage. A finder's fee, she called it, for handling the transition smoothly. 15%, she said, of whatever the estate was worth once guardianship was established and the house was sold, which had apparently already been discussed as a foregone conclusion. The house I had lived in for 30 years, the fence Walter never finished, sold before I had even agreed to leave it. Theo and I listened to that recording 4 times before either of us spoke. What we did next, we did carefully, because I had learned by then that careless people lose, even when they're right. I called my own attorney first thing in the morning, a woman named Patricia Kim who had handled Walter's estate and mine for over a decade and who, crucially, had no connection to Rousseau or to anyone Donna had been in contact with. I told her everything. She asked for the notebook and the recordings before she said another word, and once she had them, she told me something I have never forgotten. She said, "Eleanor, the fact that you kept records is the only reason this is solvable instead of a tragedy." We scheduled a meeting. Not a confrontation. Patricia was firm on that point. A meeting. Marcus and Priya were invited, along with Rousseau, since he had apparently already been engaged to begin guardianship proceedings without my full knowledge of how far along things were. Donna was invited too, though Patricia made sure she didn't know what would be presented, only that her continued employment was, vaguely, under discussion. I sat in my own kitchen, in my own chair, the day all of this came to a head, and I let Patricia do most of the talking, because that's what I was paying her for and because I wanted to watch faces, not perform for them. Rousseau spoke first, the grey suit, the careful language, the file folder of his own, full of Donna's notes, dates and incidents that I now knew, with absolute certainty, were either exaggerated or invented outright. He used the word concerning. He used the word decline. Priya sat beside him nodding, not unkindly, the nod of someone who has been told a sad story so many times she has stopped questioning whether it's true. Patricia let him finish completely before she opened her own folder. She started with the notebook, dates lined up against Donna's claims, showing exactly where they diverged, the cognitive screening the doctor had actually administered versus what Donna had reported to the family afterward, in her own words, on a call Patricia had subpoenaed records for. Marcus's face changed somewhere around the 3rd comparison. Not anger yet. Confusion, the specific confusion of a son realizing his mother might have been telling the truth the entire time and that he hadn't listened closely enough to notice. Then Patricia played the recordings. I won't pretend the room didn't go very quiet. Donna, who had been sitting near the door, stood up before the first recording finished, said something about this being a misunderstanding, said it twice, her voice climbing half an octave each time. Rousseau asked to pause the meeting. Patricia said no, and kept playing, the part about the finder's fee last, deliberately, because she understood, better than I did in that moment, that money is the thing people stop pretending about. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time after the last recording ended. He looked at Donna. He looked at me. Then he asked her, very quietly, if any of it was true: the kitchen, the recognition, the walk to the mailbox. She didn't answer. She gathered her coat and left, and I have not seen her since, except once, months later, at a hearing where her employment agency's own internal review had already terminated her for falsifying client documentation, a phrase I learned costs a person their license far more efficiently than a family argument ever could. The guardianship petition was withdrawn the same week. Russo, to his credit, or perhaps to protect himself, formally apologized for not verifying the claims more carefully before drafting paperwork that would have stripped me of the right to manage my own affairs. Priya cried, actually cried, and apologized in a way that felt complicated rather than simple, because I understood she had been frightened for me in her own way, frightened badly enough to believe the wrong person instead of asking better questions of the right one. Marcus took it hardest. He drove back to Phoenix and called me every single day for 2 weeks, not Sundays only anymore, every day, sometimes just to ask how my afternoon had gone, the way you check on someone after you've understood, fully and finally, how close you came to losing something you didn't know you were risking. I want to be fair to him, even now. He wasn't cruel. He was distant, and distance makes people trust the nearest voice instead of the truest one. Donna was nearest. I was, for a while, made to seem unreliable by someone who had every reason and every opportunity to make that seem true, and very few people checked her work, because why would they? She brought casseroles to family dinners. She remembered everyone's birthdays. People like that get believed by default, right up until a notebook and an old voice recorder prove otherwise. Theo still calls every Sunday, and most Wednesdays now too. He's finishing his degree in social work, of all things, and he told me once, half joking, that watching what happened to me is part of why he chose it. He wants to be the person who asks better questions before believing the convenient story. I think that's a good reason. I think Walter would have liked him even more for it than he already did. As for the house, the fence finally got finished last spring. Marcus came out and did it himself, 3 days of work he insisted on doing without help, like it was something he owed his father and not just me. I sat on the porch steps, the same ones I broke my hip on, and watched him measure boards in the fog, and I thought about how strange it is that the people who try to take something from you usually overestimate how easily it can be done, and underestimate how much an old woman remembers, even when someone is counting on her not remembering at all. I still keep the notebook. I haven't needed it in over a year, but I keep it, on the same shelf as Walter's old field guides, because it taught me something I want to remember on purpose now instead of by accident. Trust isn't a flaw. But it should never be the only thing standing between you and the people who are supposed to love you. If anyone is listening to this and wondering whether they're imagining the small inconsistencies piling up around someone they depend on, I'd ask you the same question Theo asked me in that garden. Have you written any of it down? Because the truth, it turns out, doesn't need you to raise your voice. It just needs you to keep a record long enough for someone to finally listen.